You're listening to Rect Radio, the source for thoughtful interviews with technology leaders, blockchain engineers, and social media trendsetters making an impact in new media. Now, here's Rob.
Hey guys, altcoin author. So I've been getting a lot of messages on Twitter and LinkedIn about how the blockchain can materially affect the future of voting. A lot of people are frustrated with the mail process and how it seems that the mail at very least was slowed down, and people are purporting to me, based on some news sources, that the delivery rates in a lot of heavily left-leaning counties and states have been slowed down to the extent that less than 70% of pieces of mail are arriving at their intended target during the dates they should be. And for the USPS, the typical delivery rate is well over 95%. So for under 70%, you're talking about a considerable drop. And if you'll remember, there was some cuts that were instituted into the USPS, and a lot of the Democratic leaders were talking about how that was used as a way to slow the mail, or at least cut off some intermediary parties that expedited things. So that is a consideration. And then also this is largely being done in states where there is no grace period. And if it's not delivered on election day, then it doesn't matter. So what people are telling me is that certain, whomever are finding heavily left-leaning counties and proceeding to slow the mail so that the absentee ballots, which, run heavily left-leaning, will not be delivered in time, and thus those votes won't be counted. So they're saying, what can we do with blockchain? How can that be a solution to the problem that we're having? And I think it comes down to, if the blockchain was ever integrated into some sort of election, then you could do it using a few different consensus mechanisms that would provide that trustless technology, would take the core issue of, can this ledger be, messed with? Is it immutable or is it mutable? And will these numbers hang up? And do we have confidence as the public that when we are looking at a particular vote, that it does reflect the true sentiment of the voter? And as it stands with the payment rails out there, Bitcoin and, Ethereum and all that, the amount of resources that it would take to what's called roll back a transaction or do a double spend or essentially messed with the technology itself is really high. So it could be done, but you'd have to amass all of the available resources that are, put out there on the internet. You'd have to have pools. You'd have to really have some coordinated attack, the likes of which, have never been seen. And I guess it would be possible, but the way you can get around that for blockchain voting is have a permissioned blockchain where the node holders, being trusted bodies that are transparent to the public, are able to get one portion of the ledger, and then it can be watched in real time. And, records of that will be put on what's called the ipfs. And so it's not all held up on one central server. It's distributed through a number of different servers. And with that technology, you would be able to have people checking and then people checking the people who are checking. And I think that that's further or closer than a lot of people anticipate. As it is, governments are playing in a real way with central banks using blockchain technologies. As you may know, like large corporations are already using it on a wholesale basis. Financial companies like JP Morgan are completely flipping on the issue of blockchain. for decentralized finance and otherwise, and to lead the way in FinTech. So I think the horizon for blockchain voting is not that much further along, and the possibility of it being instituted in the next few decades is high. And the consensus mechanisms, the voting can be done, very easily. They have a bunch of ID softwares out there that are, you can have it so that it reads your biometric information. You can, if you see, I think it's like ID.me, you go on there, and not only do you have to have an ID, but you also have to have a phone that is taking a picture of your face next to the ID, and then it gets all sorts of biometric information there about your face and the face in the picture and all that. So the technology, I think, is there to prevent against some large-scale fraud. And then a lot of the attacks that are being done out there to get into these corporate computers are pretty old attacks. DDoSes, denial of service attacks. These are 20 years old. And if you'll remember from a few years ago, a lot of the passwords, many, many thousands, were just in a .txt file on one of the Facebook computers. So the sophistication is very low, even for a lot of these big companies that are, FANG companies that are in tech, that are leading the tech revolution. So if you go about it in a real concerted way to have government embrace blockchain technology and make it so it's easy for the consumer, so they can, go to the library and use a computer, or even using those polling computers, because see, when I voted yesterday, you went in and it was all touchscreen and it looked like a really higher-end computer, more higher-end computer than I certainly had at the office. So I think the opportunity is there. And then, maybe just a good government contractor that can break it down and make sure that all of the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed as it relates to compliance and cybersecurity best practices. And you could have a much more trusted process at a time when the belief and the trust in the voting process is understandably circumspect.